there, it is time for another edition of GeoJesser Explains. Today, I thought I would follow up on a promise I made last month and do a more comprehensive overview of the Jewish dietary laws. This is something I am very familiar with and pretty well versed in, so I thought, hey, if there's anyone out there who could give an overview of what it means to keep kosher, surely it's some random person on the internet who has a geography-based channel. Huh? No, I'm kidding. I actually did keep fairly strictly kosher for a while, and so I learned a lot about how it's done and what the rules are. I've also just studied it in general, and I also went to the internet, as one does, to glean a little bit more to make sure that I was passing along the correct information. And so, with that in mind, let's talk about kashrut. The body of Jewish dietary laws is called kashrut, and somebody who follows these laws is said to keep kosher. And the word comes from a Hebrew word that means fit or appropriate. You may have heard the term used in English in the sense of something being okay, acceptable, good to go, like, does everything look kosher with my tax return? There are thousands and thousands and thousands of pages and books written about how a religious Jew should keep kosher. There goes my cat. So this 25 or 30-minute video is just a basic overview of the laws. It'll hopefully give you a better understanding of what it means to keep kosher, and especially if you're mostly unfamiliar with the practice, maybe you'll come out of here knowing a little or a lot more than you thought you knew before. At the very basic, most people, Jewish or not, are aware that Jews who keep kosher are not allowed to eat pork or shellfish. Basic. But that's really, really basic. There's a whole lot more. So let's get into it. So, as with most Jewish laws, the laws of kashrut originate in the Torah being the Hebrew word for the 5 books of Moses, or Pentateuch. Most of these laws come from the books of Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy, and here are some of the relevant verses in summary. And you'll see a more complete version on your screen as well. So in the book of Leviticus, chapter 11, verses 1 to 8, God tells Moses and Aaron that the people may eat of any animal that has true hooves with clefts through the hooves, and that chews its cud. It continues in verses 9 to 12 to say that any creature that lives in the water that has fins and scales is permissible, but any that does not have fins and scales is not permissible. So you can have tuna, but you can't have shrimp. Continuing in chapter 11 of Leviticus, verses 20 to 22 state that there are certain types of locusts and grasshoppers that are permissible to eat, but there's no other insect that is allowed to be eaten, so no crickets, for example. In verses 23 to 42 of Leviticus 11, other animals that are not to be eaten are listed. These include insects, animals with paws, cats and dogs, I guess, weasels, mice, toads, hedgehogs, chameleons, lizards, snakes, moles. And then there's a discussion about not using cookware that one of these unkosher animals has fallen into. It then continues from verses 43 to 47, stating that people should not eat these creatures because it will render them impure, and then it discusses what a person should do if they are impure so that they can be purified. It's not a big deal. Usually it's like wait till sundown. All right, we'll go into Exodus. Chapter 22, verse 30 states that you cannot eat carrion, specifically flesh torn by beasts in the field. Exodus 23:19 states you shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk, and this exact line is repeated in Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 21, along with a prohibition on eating animals that were found dead. Again, not eating carrion. Genesis chapter 9, verses 2 to 4 mention that people should not eat blood. This is reiterated in Leviticus 7:26 and Deuteronomy 12:23, and the reason is that the blood carries the soul of the animal. Back in Deuteronomy chapter 14, verses 3 to 10, lists clean animals again. A lot of Deuteronomy is a rehash of the laws given in Exodus and Leviticus, and Numbers. So it lists clean animals being ox, sheep, goat, deer, gazelle, roebuck, wild goat, ibex, antelope, mountain sheep, and any other animal that has true hooves, which are cleft in two, and again brings up cud. It then reiterates a list of animals which either have cloven hooves but do not chew cud, or that do chew cud but do not have cloven hooves, such as hares and camels, and, most famously, pigs. Chapter 14, verses 11 to 20 of Deuteronomy then lists unclean birds, which include various birds of prey, vultures, kits, ravens, ostrich, owl, gull, falcon, ibis, and bats, which are not birds, pelicans, magpies, cormorants, storks, herons, and some others. And that's about all it says in the Torah. So as with many other Jewish laws that exist today, these words from the Torah, these lines were taken by the rabbis and interpreted and reinterpreted and discussed and argued about and applied to whatever the modern day was when they were talking about it, to figure out, how do we take these rules and make sure that we're following the law? So, for example, when the crock pot was invented, they had to decide how laws around cooking would apply when you use a crock pot. Convection ovens, air fryers, any new appliance that comes up, they have to decide what to do. Any new food technology, for example, meat grown in a lab, they're still discussing how that should apply when it comes to keeping kosher. So things like that. Currently, I'm going to cover 9 sort of areas of keeping kosher that are kept to varying degrees depending on how observant a person might be. So the first layer, so to speak, is which foods you can eat, which we kind of just covered, but I'll go through them real quickly to make sure that we cover all of them. So from mammals, you can only eat animals that have a cloven hoof and chew their cud, which is mostly limited these days to cattle, sheep, goats, and deer. There are a few others as well. With birds, it's typically limited to domestic birds, although not entirely, but these include chicken, turkey, duck, goose, and pigeon, and variations thereof. There is no reptile or amphibian that is kosher. No frogs, no iguanas, none of it. No turtles. And then of fish, the only rule given is that it must have fins and scales, and that comes straight from the Torah, as you saw. So you can't have any shellfish or other seafoods, like no lobster, no crab, no shrimp, mussels, clams, oysters, and so on. A brief list of commonly eaten fish that are kosher would include tuna, salmon, cod, herring, bass, carp, mahi-mahi, trout, flounder, halibut, mackerel, snapper, and many, many others. And there is a link in the description to a fairly comprehensive list of kosher fish. It's long and alphabetized. You are allowed to eat caviar as well, as long as it comes from a kosher fish. Some commonly eaten non-kosher fish would be catfish, eel, freshwater cod, monkfish, sharks and rays, sturgeon, and swordfish. The only types of insect or other creepy crawlies that are allowed are particular locusts and grasshoppers. But these days, most rabbis are not sure exactly what kind of locust and grasshopper the Torah is referring to, and so to be safe, they generally say, don't eat any bugs. Which, honestly, I don't have much of a desire to eat a locust, so I'm not that worried about it. Any egg from a kosher bird is kosher. Any milk from a kosher mammal is kosher. So cow's milk, goat's milk, sheep's milk, all of those are fine. Horse milk is not. Camel milk is not. But duck egg, turkey egg, pigeon eggs, all of those are fine. And then all fruits, vegetables, grains, and spices are kosher. Anything that's not allowed to be eaten, anything that's not kosher, is called treif. And this designation then is extended to, for example, cooking utensils and stuff, which I'll get into in a minute, that are not kosher as well. They can be called treif. A restaurant that serves non-kosher food can be a treif restaurant. It's a pretty versatile word. All right, so the second category of kashrut, or the second layer, is how an animal is killed and prepared. So you've got your kosher animal, you've got your cow or your sheep, and you want to eat it. So a mammal or a bird must be slaughtered by a trained individual known as a shochet, which basically means ritual slaughterer or butcher. In the ritual slaughter, the trachea and esophagus of the animal are severed with a razor-sharp blade that has no imperfections. In one clean stroke, this is supposed to give the animal a painless and instantaneous death. Then, the carcass is inspected for any imperfections or abnormalities that might indicate that the animal was sick before it was killed. We don't want to eat any animals that were sick. Then the blood must be completely removed from the meat. As stated before, we're not allowed to eat blood. No black pudding over here. And usually that's done through a process of rinsing in cold water and then salting and then rinsing and then salting. Or with certain meats that are very difficult to get the blood out of, such as the liver, which is permissible to eat, of course, it can be broiled in a certain way. And then there are certain parts of even kosher animals that are not allowed to be eaten. And these include certain fats that are found on the flanks and some of the internal organs, like the kidneys, as well as the sciatic nerve. And it is very difficult to remove the exact parts of the sciatic nerve and some of the other fats that are not permissible to be eaten. So in a lot of countries where there's a market for non-kosher beef, for example, a cow will be ritually slaughtered. The parts from the front end of the cow are prepared according to the laws of kashrut, and then the rest of the cow is sold to people who don't keep kosher, to, non-Jews. It's perfectly fine for a non-Jew to eat it. These laws only apply to Jews, and it's only about sort of that separation. Most religions have certain rules that differentiate them from all the other people, right? And so this is one of the things that only Jewish people are required to do. And so it's perfectly fine to, for example, sell the back half of a cow to a non-Jew to eat. That's not a problem. So that's killing and preparing. Next, what foods not only can be eaten, but can be eaten together in the same meal? So the general rule is any food that is or contains dairy products cannot be eaten in the same meal or at the same time as foods that are or contain meat products. So you can't have a cheeseburger. You can't dip your chicken strips in blue cheese dressing. You can't put grilled chicken on your salad with ranch dressing that was made with buttermilk, things like that. There are lots of foods that are considered neither dairy nor meat, and these are called parv, including vegetables, fruits, and grains, as well as fish and eggs. But fish is kind of a special case. Fish is not allowed to be eaten at the same time as meat, but it can be eaten before meat, and it shouldn't be eaten with milk, but it can be eaten with milk products such as cheese or butter. So you can go ahead and fry up your halibut fillet in butter, not a problem, just don't eat it with meat. But if you were so inclined to eat fish in milk, which I can't think of a reason that you would want to, but I think there might be some dishes like that, that would not be kosher. So what does it mean to eat them together or in the same meal? Well, after you eat meat, it is customary to wait some amount of time for that food to be at least digested or out of your stomach and out of your mouth. For most observant Jews, they wait 6 hours. Some wait 3. It depends. With children, a lot of times they'll be allowed to only wait 1 hour because 6 hours is a long time for a kid. However, dairy is considered to be rinsed out of your system much quicker, so you can eat meat soon after eating dairy as long as you eat something parv and rinse your mouth in between. So if you had, a snack of a piece of string cheese at, 5 and then dinner's at 6 and it's a chicken dinner, that's fine. However, if you had a snack of some chicken salad at 4 o'clock and dinner is at 6 and it's supposed to be lasagna, you're SOL. Generally, people will plan ahead for these sorts of things. Some people will wait half hour or an hour after eating dairy before they eat meat, just to be sure. Again, it's all about your level of observance and how certain you want to be that you're following it as exactly as possible. Now, even though it's allowed to eat meat soon after eating dairy, it still can't be part of the same meal. So for example, you couldn't serve cream of broccoli soup as an appetizer and then wait 30 minutes and then serve baked chicken for the entree of the same meal. So there's a difference between, having a little snack to tide you over and making it part of the same meal. All right, so that's section 3. The next layer or area of keeping kosher involves dishes and utensils. So those who are very, very strict will have completely separate sets of dishes and flatware for eating meat meals and eating dairy meals. A lot of these families, especially if they have children or have guests often, will label cabinets and drawers in their kitchen with little stickers that say meat or milk on them. Or you may see the Yiddish, fleischig for meat and milchig for dairy, to indicate that the dishes in this cupboard are dairy and the dishes in this cupboard are for meat. A lot of times you'll make sure that they're from completely different sets. They look different in some way. They have different pattern. They have different colors so that you can know at a glance whether this is a dairy or a meat dish. You don't have to put a sticker on every dish. That would be excessive and it would wash off. The reason for this is, let's say you had a hamburger and it was hot and you ate it off the plate, and then you washed that plate, and then the next day you had a grilled cheese sandwich on the same plate. Well, people who are strict would say that the taste of the meat from the hamburger got transferred into the plate, and then when you put the grilled cheese on it the next day, the taste of the meat gets drawn out into the cheese sandwich, and now you're mixing milk and meat, which is not allowed. And so to be extra sure, you just keep them separate. Accidents happen. Let's say, your kid decides to have a little snack of some string cheese and decides to be formal and takes a plate and puts the string cheese on it, and then you go and see that, oops, they've put the string cheese onto a meat plate by accident. So you might call your rabbi, or you might just know the answer to this. Can I still use this plate? And the answer is usually yes. If the food that was put on the plate was cold, it is not considered to have transferred the taste. So that the meat that was already in the plate doesn't transfer to the cheese, and the cheese doesn't transfer into the plate, rendering it treif. But if you were to then put that dish in the dishwasher and it still had cheese on it, and then you washed it in super hot water with the cheese on it, not only would you be transferring the cheese to that plate, but you'd be transferring it to all of the dishes in your dishwasher. So you would just want to make sure that you got all the cheese off of it first. The next level you might expect, if you have to have separate dishes and flatware, you also have to have separate cookware and often separate appliances. So because when you're cooking, you're obviously using heat, you will often have a whole different set of pots and pans, sometimes small appliances like microwaves, toasters, and even oven. Some people will have like a regular oven that they use for meat dishes and then like a countertop oven to like make pizza in. Or if you're lucky, you have 2 whole ovens and then you use one for meat and one for dairy. And then just depending on how strict you are, if you really need to have a dairy air fryer and a meat air fryer, you might do that too. It just depends on how much space you have and what you need it for. And some families will even have separate sinks and separate dishwashers. If you're not lucky enough to have 2 dishwashers, then usually you would have the dishwasher just be for one type of dish, or in some families, they might decide that if they run the dishwasher empty in between cycles, that would clean it out, so to speak, and then you could put the other half of your dishes in there. For a sink, if you don't have 2 separate sinks, you can get a plastic bin that goes into the sink, and then you use one bin for dairy dishes and the other bin for meat dishes, and then you don't have to worry about it. Again, it's because of using hot water. If you wash it in cold water, less of a problem. So, now that we've covered what you can and can't eat, what you can and can't eat together, and what you can and can't cook and eat it on, we come to the case of Passover. In my video about Passover last month, which will be linked in a card up there and in the description below, I mentioned that there are special dietary laws that you have to follow during Passover, in addition to all of the dietary laws already discussed. So, for very strict households, as you get close to Passover, you clean your entire kitchen really, really well, and then you take all of the dishes and cookware that you use during the year and put them away in a garage or storage or something, and you bring out a whole other set or 2 of dishes and cookware that you only use for Passover. You also, a lot of families will cover all of the cooking surfaces, all of the surfaces in their kitchen with aluminum foil or contact paper or something like that as well. If you watched the show Unorthodox on Netflix, There's a scene where they're celebrating Passover and you see their kitchen and it's just absolutely covered in aluminum foil. That's why. If you didn't notice that before, you won't be able to not notice it now. However, people are not completely unreasonable and know that there is definitely a financial aspect to all of this. And so, for things like large appliances, like your oven, that you can't just swap out for a different oven for Passover, you can kosher that oven, which is the process of making it kosher again, or getting rid of whatever tastes are already in there. And so generally, if you have a self-cleaning oven, all you have to do is run the self-clean cycle because it uses a very high temperature. It kills everything in there, turns it all to ash. It's no longer a problem. It's pristine and like new. You can also kosher your stovetop, the stove grates, just by turning on all the burners really high for a few minutes. You can, if you have a stainless steel sink, you can kosher any metal by putting it in or pouring over boiling water. Again, most of these processes involve heat. So, 3 more little layers. This one involves baked goods and dairy products again. And this only applies in certain cases. There are some very religious groups who, in addition to making sure that the milk comes from a kosher animal, that someone, a Jewish person, watched the entire process, or at least evaluated the entire process, from milking the animal to packaging the milk to sending the milk off to the grocery store, that only that animal's milk is in there. Because it may have been in the past, or it may be in unreliable places, that, for example, milk from some other animal or something else might have gotten mixed in with the milk and it isn't actually just cow's milk or just goat's milk, for example. So there is a special certification. Some certain milks, usually you can only get them in kosher grocery stores, that are marked as being this special kind of milk that's been supervised the whole time. And it's a similar thing for baked goods, that they make sure that when the cookies or cake or bread was baked, it was baked by a Jewish person. Again, that's in very strict people. Most sort of mainstream Jewish people wouldn't even know about that, much less follow it, to be honest. Then we come to processed and prepackaged foods. Now, if you're somebody that has a food restriction or allergy, or you're a vegetarian or something like that, you'll be familiar with this problem. If you purchase fresh foods from the store, you buy, your chicken breasts and your tomatoes and your bananas straight from the store, and you bring them home. I hope you're not making a dish that has chicken, tomatoes, and bananas in it, but I was just naming things that you might buy. If you buy all fresh foods and prepare them in your home on your dishes with your cookware, you know exactly what went into them, there's no cross-contamination, and it's safe for you to eat. Similar things apply when you're keeping kosher. You can buy any tomato, you can buy any apple, you can buy any celery, any broccoli, anything you want that is not cooked, and prepare it yourself in your house and not worry about it. You'll know that it followed your own standards. However, there are a lot of packaged and pre-processed foods out there that people want to eat. Cereal, pasta, cheese even. Most people don't make their own cheese. Some people do. Even bagged salads, for example, salad dressing, ketchup, mustard, things like that. Anything that you would buy in a package in the store that you don't prepare yourself. So if you have allergies, for example, you're going to check the ingredients and see if there are certain allergens in it. If you are a vegetarian, you're going to check to make sure that there isn't any meat product in there. For someone who keeps kosher, they want to be certain that there is nothing about this packaged food that could be considered treif, not kosher. And to that end, there are several agencies or companies in the United States and around the world whose sole job it is to watch products being made in a factory or plant or wherever, and ensuring that there's nothing unkosher about the process. Either maybe, they threw in some natural flavoring that wouldn't be kosher, or it was prepared in the same oven as something that wasn't kosher, things like that. And if the supervising authority sees the whole process and says, yep, what you're doing is fine, this would be fine for Jews to eat, they will allow you to place their stamp, their symbol on your packaging. And then a Jewish person looking for kosher food can see that symbol on the package and be assured that it is fine for them to eat. And I'm going to show you some of these symbols over here on your screen. When you go to the store, you can look for these symbols and you can see. So for example, a very, very common one is a U with a circle around it. And this means it was certified by a group called the Orthodox Union, which is pretty much the biggest kosher certifying group in the country. And you'll find that symbol on Cheerios, you'll find it on Barilla pasta, you'll find it on some pasta sauces, you'll find it on ketchup and mustard and I don't even know, salad dressings of certain kinds and things like that. And along with the symbol, there will be the word meat or dairy or a D or the word parv or no word. So for example, Cheerios, usually it just has the OU with no letter with it. And that will tell you this is parv, or this is a meat dish, or this is a dairy dish. And that way you don't make a mistake. Now, the reason for this is that even if it's a food that wouldn't ordinarily be dairy, for example, maybe it would be even acceptable for a vegan to eat, if it was prepared in a facility that also processes dairy foods, some of that dairy might have gotten into the packaged food that isn't dairy, thereby rendering it dairy, even if it doesn't have any whey or casein or anything from milk in it. So it's a step beyond somebody who's just trying to avoid dairy because they're allergic to it, for example. There was a memorable time some years ago when Trader Joe's used to sell chocolate chips that were completely parv. They didn't have any milk in them. They weren't processed in a facility that also made milk products. And this made the religious Jews of the country very, very happy because they could make parv chocolate chip cookies or cake or blondies or whatever to serve as dessert with a meat meal, and use these cheap and easy to get chocolate chips that are pretty good. And then one day, the kosher certifying agency who supervised the production of these chocolate chips said, hate to tell you guys, but they changed the way they're manufacturing them. They're now processing them in the same facility as a place where they also make dairy products, and now we're going to have to call these things dairy. Sorry. And everybody was very sad because now they couldn't just go to Trader Joe's and buy these inexpensive and tasty chocolate chips to make their cookies with. They had to go to a Jewish grocery store and buy chocolate chips from there. Sad story, what can I say? All right. The last layer of keeping kosher would be eating out of your house, because most people don't eat every single meal all the time in their own homes. A lot of people do, but not always. And if you want to eat at a restaurant, you need to know the rules there too. And this, of course, will vary by your level of observance anyway. But if you are very, very strict, you will follow all the same rules outside of your house as you do inside of your house, because it's about what you put in your body, not what you put in your house, that matters, right? So they will only eat at a restaurant that has been certified by an agency that they trust, who has supervised the cooking of the food in this restaurant and has said, yep, they only serve kosher food. They cook it in a way that's acceptable. You can eat here. And there are kosher restaurants. You can find them, especially in areas with a concentration of religious Jews. For example, the Pico Robertson area of Los Angeles, places in New York, probably at Philadelphia. I know that there's a bunch of kosher restaurants. So they're around. If you go to Israel, most of the restaurants are kosher. And so they would be able to eat there. If they were going to go to somebody else's house, they would need to know that those people hold to the same standards that they do if they were going to eat food at that person's house. But there are some products that you can buy at a non-kosher restaurant that are kosher. For example, fountain sodas. You can go into any fast food restaurant or 7-Eleven and get a Coke in a paper cup, and that is kosher. However, many religious Jews wouldn't do that anyway. They wouldn't go through a McDonald's drive-thru to get a Coke, because if they have a McDonald's cup, even though they know all they had was a Coke, which is perfectly fine, somebody might misconstrue and think that they had eaten McDonald's food, which is not kosher. And so a lot of people would like to avoid even the appearance of having eaten at a non-kosher restaurant. The other side of that being, if you are known to be somebody who is very strict and other people might look to you for what's acceptable, and they see you with a McDonald's cup, they might think, whoa, that person eats at McDonald's? Then why are they telling me I can't, right? It would look hypocritical. But for example, slushies from 7-Eleven are kosher, and a lot of religious Jews will get their kids slushies as a treat sometimes from 7-Eleven. So that's perfectly fine. And a place like 7-Eleven, where most of the food is packaged, is different from a place like Burger King and McDonald's, where obviously it's food service, it's cooked there. All right, so that about covers it. I hope that was at least somewhat interesting and that you learned something. You should not consider this a comprehensive guide to keeping kosher. There's a lot more to it. If you want to make your kitchen kosher and serve kosher food, there's a lot more things to know. But I hope that it gave you some idea of how complex and deep these laws go, that it's a lot more than just not eating pork. If you would like to know more, feel free to ask. There will be a bunch of sources in the description as well, ones that I referred to in making this. And if you'd like to add anything, feel free to do that in the comments as well. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you again relatively soon for another GeoJesser Explains. If you enjoy this kind of content, please like and subscribe to my channel, leave me a comment, and if you are so inclined, head over to Patreon and join me there for as little as $1 a month. There's some bonus content, and you get the satisfaction of helping me out and seeing your name on the next screen. Time for another edition of GeoJesser Explains. That was so good that I should use that every time. Hey, Thunder. Hi, Thunder. Meow.